52 years I've backpacked these mountains, and 3 years ago something stalked me for 67 miles, watching me sleep, matching every step I took, circling my camps in the dark. When federal agents showed up at my door with files on 3 other hikers who'd encountered it, I understood why 2 of them are missing, and the 3rd won't talk anymore. September 2021. I was 62, planning my annual North Fork loop, 67 miles through remote Cascade territory. I'd walked these trails hundreds of times as a wilderness guide, then as a solo backpacker. This was my pilgrimage every fall when the crowds cleared out. I packed the night before: tent, sleeping bag, 7 days of meals, water filtration, bear spray. My truck was loaded before dawn. I drove 2 hours to the trailhead, signed the register, and stepped into the forest as the sun cleared the ridgeline. The first 12 miles were perfect. Clear skies, 60s, dry trail. I reached Timber Creek Camp by mid-afternoon. Set up my tent in a clearing I'd used a dozen times, filtered water, and ate dinner as the sun dropped. Everything felt normal, safe. But as darkness settled, something changed. What was unusual was the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No owls, no mice rustling, no insects. In 52 years, I'd learned that silence like this means one thing: a predator is nearby. Something big enough that every other creature has gone still. I sat by my campfire listening, watching the tree line. I know how to make myself less appealing as prey, stay calm, make noise, appear large. But the silence stretched on for hours. Whatever was out there wasn't moving. It was waiting. At 2 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps. Bipedal. Steady, deliberate, heavy. Circling my camp at maybe 50 feet. I grabbed my headlamp and bear spray, pointed the light toward the sound. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. But I knew something was standing just beyond the reach of my light. Something that walked on 2 legs. The footsteps continued for 20 minutes, completing a full circle. Then they stopped. I stayed awake until dawn, bear spray in hand. When the sun rose, I checked the perimeter, found impressions in the soft earth. Not boot prints, not paw prints. Elongated depressions, at least 16 inches long, showing 5 distinct toe marks. Too large for humans, too structured for bear. I photographed them, measured them. Then I made a decision. I continued the loop. Day 2 started with a knot in my stomach. 24 miles ahead, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I'd never abandoned a trip because I was spooked, and part of me wanted to know what had circled my tent. By noon, climbing toward Broken Hand Pass, I started noticing the signs. Broken branches in the tree line, snapped at 8, 9 feet up. Fresh breaks, sap still wet. Something large had moved through here, parallel to the trail. I felt watched. The weight of unseen eyes on your back. At a switchback, I tested my theory. Stopped abruptly mid-stride. The forest sounds continued normally, but underneath, almost imperceptible. Movement in the undergrowth stopping exactly when I stopped. The thing was pacing me, matching my rhythm. I spent the next hour trying to catch a glimpse, doubled back suddenly, cut off the trail to higher ground. Nothing worked. It knew the terrain better than I did. By late afternoon, approaching Granite Creek, I found the cairn, right in the middle of the trail. A stack of rocks, deliberately balanced, 3 feet tall. 5 stones in descending size. I'd passed this spot 3 months earlier. No cairn then. The stones were water-smoothed river rocks, carried up from the creek below, a quarter mile through rough terrain. Whatever built this had invested significant effort. As I studied it, that sensation of being watched intensified. 200 yards to my east, Something moved. Something large and dark shifted position, then went still. I raised my camera, zoomed in. Could have been a shadow. Could have been something standing upright, watching me. I made camp in a defensive position, tent backed against a boulder, fire built close. As darkness fell, I heard them. Tree knocks. Crack, crack, crack. 3 sharp impacts echoing across the valley. I'd heard stories about this from other guides. The sound came from the east. Then, after a pause, answering knocks from the west. They were talking to each other. About me. Day 3 began with a smell. I woke to an odor so overwhelming it made me gag. Musky, rotten, like wet dog mixed with spoiled meat. The stench permeated everything. I unzipped my tent quickly. Nothing. Just the smell, then dissipating as the morning breeze picked up. This was a message. Whatever followed me was close enough to mark my camp, close enough to harm me if it wanted. The fact that I was still breathing meant it had chosen not to. I broke camp quickly, desperate to put miles between myself and whatever had stood outside my tent. The planned route took me through Deadfall Creek Valley, a narrow canyon with steep walls. The thought of entering that confined space made my hands shake. I had 2 choices: continue through Deadfall Creek or take the emergency bailout trail. I chose survival, started toward the bailout trail. I made it 300 yards before I stopped. The smell was ahead of me, coming from the bailout trail. Whatever tracked me wasn't just following, it was herding, cutting off my escape. The strategic intelligence required was staggering. This wasn't animal behavior. This was tactical thinking. So I entered the valley. I loosened the bear spray, kept my trekking poles in hand, and started down into Deadfall Creek Canyon. The valley was darker than I remembered, the sun blocked by high walls. The creek ran fast and loud, perfect ambush terrain. 2 miles in, I heard the vocalization. A howl that started low and guttural, then rose in pitch and volume, echoing off the walls until I couldn't tell where it originated. Not a wolf, not elk. The sound held multiple tones simultaneously, like throat singing, resonating in my chest. 15 seconds, then cut off. Then, from further down the valley, an answering call. They were coordinating, communicating my position. I counted at least 3 distinct vocalizations, triangulating around me. They operated as a group. I noticed the scat, fresh deposits on rocks, placed prominently. Large piles, too big for bear, containing berries, hair, and bone fragments. Deliberate placement. We're here. We're watching. This is our territory. As I climbed out toward higher ground, exhaustion hit. I'd barely slept in 2 nights. I found a clearing off trail, sheltered by rock. Set up camp early, 3 in the afternoon. That's when I decided to make contact. I was 52 years into a life lived in these mountains. If these beings were as intelligent as their behavior suggested, maybe communication was possible. I found a heavy branch, walked to the clearing's edge, and struck it against a tree. Crack, crack, crack. 3 deliberate knocks. Then I waited. The forest went absolutely still. I stood there, feeling incredibly vulnerable. Then, from maybe 100 yards away, crack. A single knock. Acknowledgement. I'd made contact. I called out, "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just passing through. I respect your territory." 10 minutes later, 2 more knocks from a different direction. They'd heard me. No footsteps that night. But I heard them. Occasional vocalizations, tree knocks echoing. They were watching, but differently, with curiosity instead of threat. Day 4 dawned cold. I woke to frost and something placed outside my camp that made my heart stop. A rabbit, recently gone, still warm. partially skinned, placed on a flat rock 10 feet from my tent, and beside it, a footprint, 18 inches long, 5 clear toe impressions. It had stood here while I slept and left this offering. I made a decision based on instinct. I took the rabbit, accepted the gift, cooked part of it carefully, ate it while clearly visible from the forest. Then I left the remainder with some of my trail mix. An exchange. Acknowledgement. I continued hiking, glancing back after an hour from a high ridge. Through my binoculars, I could see the campsite below. Something large and dark moved near the rock. Then it straightened, and I got my first clear look. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Covered in dark reddish-brown hair, shaggy and thick. Shoulders wider than any human, arms that hung past its knees. Even at this distance, I could see it wasn't an animal. The features were too ordered, too expressive. It stood there for almost a minute, facing my direction. Then, deliberately, it raised one massive arm. Not threatening, just acknowledging. I lowered my binoculars slowly, hands shaking. Sasquatch. The creature that science claims doesn't exist, and it let me see it. The next 2 days took on a different character. I wasn't fleeing. I was being escorted. I'd see them occasionally on ridgelines, sometimes 1, sometimes 2 or 3, always visible enough to let me know they were there. By day 5, I'd covered 52 miles. The route took me past a waypoint where I'd placed a trail camera in June. As I approached, my stomach tightened. The camera was still there, but the angle had changed. I climbed to it, hands shaking. The mounting bracket showed marks. Something had gripped it and rotated the entire assembly. The pressure required exceeded human strength. I popped out the SD card. 3 months of images scrolled past. Deer, elk, a black bear. Then, starting in late August, something changed. Sasquatch. Multiple individuals approaching cautiously, studying it. One reached out, touched the lens housing gently. In the next sequence, dated September 1st, 3 days before I started this trip, 3 individuals appeared. 2 adults, 1 juvenile. A family group. They allowed themselves to be photographed from multiple angles. The largest one deliberately rotated the camera, carefully, with precision. But the final images showed them returning, looking directly into the lens. Close-ups so detailed I could see individual hairs, expressions, intelligence in the eyes. They knew I'd come back for this camera. They were leaving me a message. We've been watching you watch us. These creatures had sophisticated understanding of technology. They'd been preparing for this encounter, setting the stage before I even entered the forest. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated. The largest individual had scarring on its right shoulder and a distinctive grey patch. I'd seen that pattern through my binoculars. This was the one that had been following me, and it had been planning our interaction for at least a week. I copied the SD card to 2 USB drives, put one in my pack, and hid the other under a rock, marked with GPS coordinates. I memorized. If my gear was confiscated, the evidence would survive. If you want to follow this investigation deeper, hit that subscribe button, because what I found on day 6 will make you question everything. On the morning of day 6, I took a detour through a valley I'd only visited once, 20 years back. A memory of a rock formation that seemed out of place. I found the spot after an hour. A granite overhang created a natural shelter, and underneath it, I stopped walking. Woven grass bedding, deliberately constructed mats, layered and compressed from use. Multiple generations. A fire pit ringed with stones. Evidence of repeated fires over years, maybe decades. And surrounding the pit, tools. Smooth river stones with edges worked sharp. Wooden implements, fire-hardened. Bone tools. But what froze me were the markings on the rock walls. Pictographs, handprints pressed into the stone, proportions completely wrong for humans. Too large, finger placement different, and, alongside adult prints, smaller ones, children, family groups. The pictographs showed upright bipeds, stick figure families, geometric patterns, a complex circular design that looked deliberately mathematical. This wasn't just a stopping point. This was a home, a place used across generations, proof of culture, society. They were a population with tradition, skill sharing, accumulated knowledge passed down through families. As I photographed the pictographs, I heard it, a low rumble from the ridge above, something between a growl and a warning. I was inside their home without permission. I slowly lowered the camera, raised my hands, empty, non-threatening, called out, "I understand what this is. I respect it. I'm not here to take anything." The rumbling stopped. Then, from the ridge, a single tree knocks. Permission granted. On the ridge above, maybe 70 yards away, I counted 5 distinct figures. The family group from the trail camera, plus 2 others. 7 individuals, standing in clear view. The alpha with the grey patch raised one arm toward me, then gestured toward the shelter. "You understand now. This is our home." I raised my hand in return. We stood like that for maybe 30 seconds, 2 different species sharing a moment of mutual recognition. Then they turned and melted back into the forest. I left the site exactly as I'd found it. If word got out, it would be overrun within weeks. The shelter would be excavated, destroyed. The family was displaced or worse. The final 12 miles passed in a blur. As I descended toward the trailhead, I began noticing my escorts again. Multiple individuals visible on slopes parallel to the trail, not hiding, moving openly, an honor guard. I counted 8 distinct figures. They were showing me their numbers. I reached the trail register at 3 in the afternoon. I signed out, noting excellent weather and wildlife observations. Underneath the register box, someone had placed something. A river stone, smooth and round. One side marked with a white substance, showing a handprint. Not mine. Larger. Another message. "Safe travels. You were protected." Before getting in my truck, I turned to face the forest. On the ridge above, 3 figures stood side by side. I saw the alpha raise its arm. Farewell. Acknowledgement. I raised my hand in response, held it there until they disappeared. Then I got in my truck and drove away, carrying evidence that would change everything, or get me labeled insane. 3 days later, early evening, a knock on my door. Outside, heavy autumn rain hammered the roof. I opened the door to find 2 people in Park Service uniforms. The woman introduced herself as Senior Ranger Tom Callahan, Regional Wildlife Management. Callahan was direct. "Mr. Mitchell, we understand you completed the North Fork Loop last week. We'd like to discuss what you documented." They knew. About my cameras, about the shelter, about everything. I invited them in. We sat at my kitchen table. Rain continued outside. Callahan pulled out a tablet, the screen glowing blue in the dim light. She showed me images. Trail camera footage, but not from my cameras. From Park Service equipment. Multiple cameras had tracked my entire route. "How much have you shared?" I answered. "Nothing. Haven't told anyone except you." She nodded. "Good. Because we need to have a conversation about what you found. And why does it need to stay protected?" She opened the first file. The trail I'd hiked on day 2, captured in perfect resolution as I examined that rock cairn. My hands started shaking. She swiped to the next file. A population map. 63 red dots across the North Fork Range, each dot labeled family groups, individuals, migration patterns. NF Alpha 07. That was him. They'd been tracking him for 8 years, knew everything. The Park Service has been aware of Sasquatch populations since the 1960s. Confirmed, documented populations across multiple national forests. We've been monitoring them, protecting habitat, and maintaining strict information control. Another file, a surveillance record with my name at the top. They'd been watching me since 2008. The Sasquatch had noticed my cameras years before I noticed them. 13 years of evaluation, testing my consistency. They habituate specific humans, people they encounter repeatedly over years. They test trust incrementally. You're the third person in this region they've made direct contact with in 20 years. The other 2 were indigenous guides. You're the first outside observer they've trusted enough to show their family sites. I'd been chosen, evaluated, trusted. But the third file made my blood run cold. Names, dates, consequences. A biology professor in Oregon, tenure revoked. A wildlife photographer in Washington, work blacklisted, custody lost. A recreational hiker in California, committed for evaluation, discredited. All 3 had tried to prove Sasquatch existed. All 3 had their lives dismantled. We protect them by protecting the secret, and we protect the secret by any means necessary. I asked, why hide this? Because public disclosure would doom them. Within 6 months, every habitat would be overrun. Trophy hunters, media, tourists, developers. The creatures would be harassed, hunted, displaced before protective measures could be implemented. She pulled up more files. 12 documented cases since 2003 of protective escort behavior like mine. Always in Deadfall Creek Valley. The mountain lion there is an active threat, responsible for 3 losses, though official reports attributed those to falls or exposure. The Sasquatch actively intervenes to protect humans they've evaluated. The program is fragmented. We lose track of individuals. Family groups migrate to zones we're not monitoring. We're not running some omniscient surveillance state. We're trying to keep people from hunting them to extinction. Half the time, we're 1 step behind. We'd like to collect your footage. We'll provide compensation for your continued work as an unofficial observer. They trust you. That's invaluable. But the evidence stays classified, for their protection. I asked about consequences if I refused. We won't threaten you, but we will discredit your evidence, challenge its authenticity, release counter footage that confuses the narrative. Your evidence will join 1,000 other sightings that the internet debates endlessly, and the increased attention will force us to restrict access, displace the family group. Your disclosure would harm them. She was explaining the consequences. Going public would trigger chain reactions I couldn't control. They left without another word. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, the stone from North Fork in front of me. I thought about it for 3 days. Finally, I made a decision. A compromise. I didn't hand over my evidence. I'd already copied it and hidden multiple backups. But I didn't go to mainstream media either. I spent 2 weeks setting up anonymous digital identities, encrypted communication. I released the trail camera footage through 3 cryptozoology research organizations, but edited strategically. I removed GPS metadata, blurred landmarks, and cut any frames showing the shelter's location. The footage spread through Bigfoot research communities, generated excitement, debate. Believers called it the best evidence in decades. Skeptics found reasons to doubt. Mainstream media gave it 20 seconds, then moved on. Perfect. The truth was out there, but not so explosive that it triggered chaos. Callahan called me a week later. Just 2 words. Well played. You stayed within boundaries we can accept, but I needed to understand more. The protective escort behavior, the cultural sites, where did it come from? I reached out to elders from the Yakama Nation. An elder named Joseph Tahoma agreed to meet me. Joseph didn't want to meet in town. We drove 90 minutes into the mountains, hiked 2 miles to a clearing he called a listening place, somewhere his grandfather had brought him to teach about the forest people. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo from 1967, a figure in a meadow, unmistakably Sasquatch. But what stopped my breathing was the second figure, a man standing 20 feet away. No fear, no tension. That's my grandfather. They had a relationship. He brought them food. They'd leave him things, carved bones, woven grass circles, gifts exchanged over 50 years. When he passed, they came to the reservation edge, watched his funeral from the tree line. My mother saw them. So did 36 others. The whole community knew. We just didn't tell your people, because you weren't ready. Indigenous tribes across the Northwest had relationships with Sasquatch spanning thousands of years. Not conflict, mutual respect. The Stick Indians, that's what his people called them, didn't interfere with villages. Both groups shared the land. When European colonizers arrived, they dismissed these stories. But government agencies knew better. By the 1980s, federal research had confirmed everything indigenous people had been saying for millennia. The cover-up isn't just about protecting the creatures, it's about avoiding a massive admission. Indigenous knowledge systems were right. Western science was blind. He looked at me. They showed themselves to you because you walked in a good way. You go alone into their country. You watch but don't take. Your experience isn't special to you. It's special because white culture finally produced someone capable of seeing what my ancestors always saw. That hit me hard. My 6 days in the North Fork weren't discovered. They were educated. The Sasquatch were teaching me how to be neighbors again. What do you think this means? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me what mystery I should investigate next. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. If Sasquatch had been here for thousands of years, protected by the government since the 60s, how many were really out there? I pulled out maps at 2 in the morning, spread them across my floor, started marking patterns, seasonal closures, habitat protection zones. When I connected the locations that matched North Fork's patterns, my hands stopped moving. 17 zones. If each had populations like North Fork's 63 individuals, that meant over 1,000 creatures within 3 states. But the closure pattern extended beyond the Northwest. Appalachian Wilderness, Canadian Rockies, northern Minnesota. I spent 72 hours mapping every pattern. If the pattern held, I was looking at maybe 3,000 across the continent. Not a declining species, a civilization, hidden in plain sight. Each zone had its own protocol, run through different agencies, but no single agency knew the full picture. They'd compartmentalized the program so thoroughly that rangers in one region had no idea about others. Deliberate fragmentation. I contacted other wilderness guides, asked carefully about unusual experiences. More stories emerged. Patterns identical to mine. Solo hikers guided through dangerous terrain. Food gifts. Tree knocks. Visual sightings granted to people who'd proven themselves. Dozens of encounters, all kept quiet. I thought about the logging companies, mining operations, developers working in those zones. If Sasquatch got official protection, billions in resource access would vanish. No wonder they kept it quiet. And indigenous land claims. If Sasquatch had occupied territories for thousands of years, indigenous nations could use that evidence to support treaty rights. The legal implications would reshape land ownership across multiple states. Every president since Kennedy had known. All of them had made the same choice. Keep it buried. Share this with anyone who's ready to know the truth. Because what lives in our mountains deserves recognition, even if that recognition has to come quietly, one trusted witness at a time. 3 years have passed. Last week, I hiked the Bear Creek Trail. At mile 17, I found a new stone. Smooth river rock placed deliberately. They're still watching, still communicating. Callahan sends me occasional texts, coordinates and cryptic messages. I investigate. Sometimes I find evidence. Sometimes I see them. Always briefly. Always on their terms. I've learned to recognize their signs everywhere. Not just in the North Fork. Across multiple ranges. They're adapting. Learning to avoid cameras. Understanding human technology. They're playing a long game, betting that remaining hidden is safer than being discovered. I keep the stone they gave me on my desk. The handprint is fading, but I don't need the marking anymore. I remember what it represents. Trust offered, knowledge shared, responsibility accepted. Sometimes I'll find new stones at trail intersections. Messages. We remember you. Keep walking respectfully. I have 17 of them now. 17 encounters over 3 years. 17 reminders that I'm not alone in these forests. But 6 months after the anonymous release, something arrived that changed everything. I received a package. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, printed on official Park Service paper, but with no markings. The image showed a shelter, not the one I'd found. Different geography, but the same construction, the same cultural markers. And in the corner, barely visible, a date stamp, 1952. 14 years before Callahan claimed government monitoring began. On the back, someone had written, "They didn't find them in the 60s. They've been managing this since before you were born. And North Fork is just one site. There are 47 others, some with populations that would terrify you, some with behaviors we don't understand. Keep walking in a good way, Mr. Mitchell, because what you saw was kindergarten compared to what's really out. There." No signature. I keep that photo next to the 17 stones, a reminder that even after everything I've learned, I'm still only seeing a fraction of the truth. The mountains hold secrets deeper than even the government admits. And somewhere out there, someone inside the program thinks I'm ready to know more. Next time you're alone in the wilderness and the forest goes suddenly silent, pay attention. Something might be evaluating you, deciding whether you walk in a good way. Respect the land. Move quietly. Leave no trace. And maybe you'll receive your own gift, your own stone, your own moment of contact with something that science claims is impossible, but indigenous wisdom always knew was real. They're out there, in numbers larger than anyone admits, watching from ridgelines, protecting their families in shelters we walk past without seeing, living parallel to our civilization, waiting to see if humanity will mature enough to deserve their trust. I've been given that trust, earned through decades of respectful behavior and granted in 6 days of testing. Now I carry it forward, documenting carefully, sharing selectively, protecting what needs protection while honoring truth that deserves recognition. This is what I know. Sasquatch are real. They're intelligent. They're numerous. They're managed by government agencies that keep them hidden for complex reasons. And they make contact with individual humans they deem trustworthy. Everything else, population numbers, full territorial extent, what those 47 other sites contain, remains a mystery. Mystery I'll keep investigating. I'm 65 years old. I've walked these mountains for more than 50 years. I thought I knew them. But that 6-day trip taught me something. I'd been blind, walking past evidence of an entire hidden civilization for decades. The mountains didn't change. I did. I finally learned to see what was always there. I've told you what I know. But that 1952 photograph sitting on my desk reminds me there's still 46 other sites out there I haven't seen yet. If you want to follow me deeper into these mountains and uncover what the government's been hiding since before we were born, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. What do you think those 47 sites really contain? And next time you're alone in the wilderness and the forest goes silent, pay attention, because I'll be out there, and so will they.